Hello, I'm Dr. Craig Childress. I'm a clinical psychologist in Pasadena, California. I specialize in working with children and families around issues of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, parent-child relationship problems, angry, oppositional, defiant children, marital problems. And in this video series, I've been discussing a particular type of parent-child relationship issue that I describe as the parental alienation dynamic. And in this set of video segments, I'm discussing the origins of the parental alienation dynamic in a process called the transgenerational transmission of trauma, which is an early childhood conceptual framework describing how relationship patterns are transferred from early childhood into future relationships. Now, in the previous video segments, I discussed the initial trauma in the beta child alpha parent relationship, how that trauma was maintained in its sort of pristine state because the child never entered authentic relationships and never had the ability or the chance to modify the relationship narrative that psychological fusion represents safety, psychological separateness represents danger. In fact, it provokes intense anxiety. And so how that relationship structure and the trauma networks that were built through use-dependent processes in early childhood are transferred almost intact to the current relationship patterns, and how the beta parent looks really nice and normal and fine until you trigger the trauma networks through psychological separateness. The moment you trigger them, then the beta parent experiences this intense anxiety because the neurological networks have been built through use-dependent processes. So the moment you're psychologically separate, bam, up comes the anxiety, and then how the beta parent then attributes meaning to that intense anxiety that begins the reenactment narrative, that the delta parent, the targeted parent, is somehow abusive, and that the child becomes the victim, and now there's a representational overlay in the brain networks of the beta parent regarding the delta child and the beta child, and the delta parent and the alpha parent. And so the relationship networks kind of begin to overlap each other. So it's not really the delta parent, it's the alpha parent, and it's not really the delta child, it's the beta child, and vice versa. And so everything's beginning to kind of get fused within the psychological structure of the beta parent. Now, in addition to this process, because this is a trauma process involving intense anxiety and the reactivation of intense anxiety, just like the Vietnam vet and PTSD would all of a sudden find himself, on the streets of Milwaukee, but actually psychologically back in the jungles of Nam, this beta parent finds himself in relationship with the delta parent, but actually in relationship with the alpha parent way back from early childhood. And so it's a reactivation of trauma networks that involve intense anxiety. And so the beta parent has to manage the intense anxiety associated with the reactivation of these trauma networks. And that gives rise to two particular features of the reenactment scenario. The first is, in that initial trauma experience of the alpha parent and beta child, the beta child was a helpless victim. And that was the source of that intense anxiety. The beta child couldn't tell which parent they were going to receive and were vulnerable and helpless with regard to that relationship. In the current situation, in order to manage that anxiety associated with the helplessness of the child, in the current situation, the child is now an active agent of rejection. The child's not the passive recipient of the abusive parent's abuse. The child is an active agent of rejecting the parent. So it's as if the beta child is rejecting the alpha parent, not the alpha parent rejecting the beta child. And so that's one fundamental difference in the current reenactment scenario that manages to some degree the beta parent's anxiety associated with the process. The child is no longer a helpless victim. But even more importantly is that in the original situation of the beta child and the alpha parent, the beta child was alone. they had no one there to protect them. Not quite accurate, but they were alone. They had no one there to protect them. In the current situation, the beta child / delta child has the beta parent, the alienating parent, to protect them. The child is not alone. They have a protector. Now, I kind of said that the original beta child had no one there to protect them. It wasn't quite accurate. They did have somebody there to protect them. The split-off representation of the all-good parent. If the beta child had the split-off representation of all the good parent, that parent could protect them from the all-bad parent. And because those representational networks are split, it's almost like they're being two different people. And so the beta child was protected by the all-good parent. Well, guess who gets the representational network for the all-good parent in the current situation? The beta adult. The beta adult is the all-good parent protecting the delta child, beta child, from the abuse of the delta parent, alpha parent. So you have this entire reenactment of these relationship patterns from early childhood into the current situation. Meanwhile, the delta parent isn't doing anything. They didn't do a thing. They're just standing on the sideline. The only thing they did was be psychologically separate from the beta parent. And bam, this whole thing got reenacted, driven by this intense anxiety and the belief that the delta parent is the alpha parent, is the abusive parent, okay, is somehow abusive. And that belief in that this person is somehow abusive is what produces those quote-unquote false allegations of abuse that we sometimes see in this scenario. Because from the perspective of the beta parent, that anxiety is real. That is a real experience of this intense anxiety and this intense threat that they know for a fact that the delta parent is abusive because they feel this intense anxiety. They feel that threat. Anxiety signals threat. They feel that threat associated with the delta parent. And so as much as we try to talk them out of it or convince them out of it, there's no convincing them out of it because of the authenticity of that trauma network of anxiety that has been reactivated. Okay. And so this whole situation involves the re-triggering of trauma networks from early childhood and their reenactment in the current scenarios, whereby everybody has a role to play in this reenactment of these trauma networks. And it is this reenactment process that represents the delusional disorder. It is the child's participation in this reenactment scenario as pretending to be the victimized child, and not pretending to be. They kind of are just going along with it. They're going along with their script in the play. And so it is this reenactment by the child that represents the shared psychotic disorder, the shared delusional disorder, because they are no longer having the authenticity of their own childhood, but they are living the relationship patterns from the beta parent's own traumatic childhood past. That's the shared psychotic disorder of the child. And that's why it becomes so important to diagnose this and to appropriately treat it so that we can return an authentic life to the delta child, so that they don't simply have to reenact trauma networks from 20, 30 years before. And so essentially what's happening is the abuse of the alpha parent is continuing, and the abuse of the alpha parent is abusing the delta child. It's just using the beta parent as the transmission vehicle for the continuation of this abusive process. The beta parent is as much a victim in this as anybody. It's just that they believe their trauma networks. They believe that the anxiety associated with it's actually occurring in real, and it's not.